By reading Picketty's introduction, I came to understand that upon his exposure to American academics and economics, he became discontent with the mathematical and theoretical basis of analysis being done. He wanted to focus his attention towards the betterment of the conditions of millions who live within capitalism, and towards that end, work towards creating a more just society. So, in a spirit of enlightenment, I thought it would be appropriate to call my mother to humanize the statistics Piketty is seeking to remedy. Hers is just one story of the approximately 9.5 million individuals who are classified as the working poor. These individuals are doing what capitalism has told them to do in order to better themselves, work relentlessly. Yet they are stuck in an endless cycle of poverty that holds recurring themes of generational bondage. They were the unfortunate lot who were not granted the magic formula to ensure social mobility. Now, this is a generalization, I know, but it holds steady. They did not inherit wealth and they could not receive a higher education.
¿Cuántas horas trabajas por semana?
60 euros por semana.
Y ganas suficiente para poder alimentar una familia de dos y pagar la renta?
No, solo con un sueldo no se puede.
En peor estado que usted.
Sí.
¿Cómo?
Una familia compuesta, la mamá trabaja, gana 400 a la semana y tiene que mantener a 7 niños. Y trabajan toda la semana, los 7 de la semana y no tienen dinero. No les alcanza ni para comerse una hamburguesa de McDonald's.
With these stories of mine, and remembering that these are the masses who are affected by the hoarding of resources, the question I would like to explore with Piketty's text about rising wealth inequality in the 21st century is, do governments have a moral obligation to close the wealth gap in the 21st century, and how should they approach the issue? The thesis I came upon is that the government has an obligation to intervene in the market because the current levels of inequality are unjustified, and unfettered markets will allow inequality to grow infinitely, which will infringe on society's ability to distribute fundamental rights equally. They can mend the gap by analyzing and restructuring the institutions of higher education and taxation, which foster forces that allow inequality to converge. I think it is important to note that Piketty's aim in writing this book was not to denounce capitalism, but to acknowledge the historical trends that have brought us to this period of inequality resembling the 19th century, and to help us think toward shaping the future. We see that inequality is not justified and is based on an arbitrary economic system. It is also dependent on political actors who subjectively pit the interests of a few over the well-being of the masses. Piketty regularly refers to Article 1 of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen of 1789 to judge the merits of inequality. Social distinctions can be based only on common utility. In essence, inequality is all right if it is just and serves the common good, but once this proposition has been infringed, it is up to society to remedy the distinctions or the inequalities that are produced. If there is public consensus, act on the will of the people and expand the social state. So, just because the market causes inequalities in its natural state does not make it a sufficient determinant of just conditions. Further, the current levels of inequality cannot be justified by productivity levels or meritocracy. The wealthiest individuals in the world are not working their bodies to collapse to amass their billions. They are taking advantage of two key actors. The first is government policy and lax laws that benefit corporations. Piketty does not touch upon very specific details in our selected readings, but one must only trace the neoliberal developments such as NAFTA that allow trade and globalization to benefit huge corporations and sacrifice the livelihoods of thousands of manufacturing workers in the US and pitted low-wage workers in Mexico against each other, while simultaneously increasing the profits of multinational corporations. Another such example is from the policies created from the false estimation of the Kuznets curve, in which it was predicted that a mass amount of inequality needed to occur before the levels could even off. And the second key is a little formula Piketty likes to call R greater than G, in which R stands for the average annual rate of return on capital as a percentage of its total value, and G stands for the rate of growth of the economy. In essence, if you own capital and you invest that capital, you will get a greater rate of return than if you were putting in your own labor. So this growth of the economy, as Piketty notes, is so significant because it is one of the main reasons there has not been class warfare, and why Marxist theory has not been consistent. A suffering population has been able to become docile based off of their purchasing power. This formula creates the devaluation of everything capitalism is supposed to stand for: meritocracy and hard work, and simultaneously explains why the market must be restrained. Picketty writes that the more perfect the capital market, the more likely R is to be greater than G. The capitalistic market was never intended to be a force for equality, so the current state of affairs, in which the rate of return of capital is greater than the growth of the economy, will not change without intervention. So it's logical to ask, why is this so bad? Well, this means that inequality will grow infinitely without intervention. Picketty writes that there is no natural, spontaneous process to prevent destabilizing, inegalitarian forces from prevailing permanently. The rate of return of capital being greater than the growth of the economy has rendered labor and productivity levels obsolete compared to the simple fact of owning pre-existing capital. Working 24 hours a day for the rest of your life makes no difference when there are individuals who can endlessly multiply their capital from simply using the market to their advantage. Infinite accumulation brings into play David Ricardo's principle of scarcity, in which he was concerned with rent prices skyrocketing due to the increased population and less land being available in the 1800s. For us, this principle of scarcity is important because it means that there is no limit to what the wealthiest individuals in the world can own or do. Money begets political influence, which begets the power to inflict your desires upon the masses. At times, most of the time, the wealthiest individuals' desires may be in conflict with the well-being of the masses. Think labor laws, and the fight for minimum wage still wages on to this day. So how do we protect the fundamental rights of the masses against the will of the powerful minority? We do this through institutions and the social state that emerged after the Great Depression. The flourishing of any institution is purely based off of its organizational function, but more importantly on its resources. So, on the money that it has. And that is why the current modes of taxation and redistribution are so important. They are based off of an idealistic set of rights that humans are born with, of which societies have agreed they are born with, regardless of origin. Through Picketty's analysis of the social state, we see how Western countries have come to a historically developed understanding that health, education, and old age pension are rights that should be granted to all. But fundamental rights, like equal chances of education, are not allowed to flourish when inequality is rampant, so government has a self-prescribed obligation to fulfill these rights. This can be contested, but the Constitution says that everyone has an equal right to the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, it should derive that if one has not been granted with the capital to flourish in a capitalistic economy, then one should be given the tools and institutions to reach a point of being able to accumulate capital and live unrestrained from the chains of selling your labor power. The mechanisms through which equality of opportunity can be reached in order to offset the origin of inequality can be found in education. Picketty finds that the main forces for convergence of inequality are the diffusion of knowledge and the investment in training and skills. Yet we know that this simple remedy has not been equally administered across society and has actually further exacerbated the forces of inequality. Government should intervene in cases where we have failed as a society to give equal opportunities. So we can analyze the higher education system as an aristocratic institution covered in a veil of meritocratic might. The U.S. spends money on public education to foster social mobility, one of our portrayed fundamental values, yet fails to realize that mobility is not contingent on a memorization of algebra. It is contingent on if you receive a college education or not, one that doesn't put you in everlasting debt. According to Picketty, compared to Europe and the Nordic countries, the U.S. has the lowest social mobility. So how is this possible when we boast the best institutions of higher education in the world? Are all poor people just dumb and can't get into these schools? No, these institutions are self-serving, made up of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. He explains that the tuition rates can only be afforded by a subset of the population. He writes that the average income of the parents of Harvard students is currently about $450,000, which corresponds to the average income of the top 2% of U.S. income earners. It is quite evident what the requirements to get into schools like Harvard are. Piketty proposes public finance incentives, however, given America's polarization and the elite control of government, that is not a proposal I can place much hope in. But one must realize that these higher institutions are the great ways to high-paying jobs that can move families out of poverty and provide them with the capital they need to begin taking advantage of the formula of R being greater than G. So if these institutions are not going to change their policies, the least they could do is increase the transparency so that the masses can stop being illusioned with the prospects of social mobility and mobilize towards creating real change. The crux of the matter is that they are using meritocracy, they, as in the institutions, using meritocracy to justify existing inequalities while ignoring the sometimes patent failures of the current system. Moving beyond domestic inequality to global inequality, it is necessary to talk about Piketty's experiment in idealism. Unfettered capitalism advantages no one but the capitalist, so he believes that we need a progressive global tax on capital to ensure accurate bookkeeping, transparency, and democratic accountability. This tax would be a very small percentage, and this measure would be able to help form accurate policy that needs to be informed by accurate records of shares of wealth. The purpose of this tax is not to finance a social state, but to regulate capitalism. The goal is first to stop the indefinite increase of inequality of wealth.